Hi, everyone. Welcome back to In Session with Ashley B. I'm your host, Ashley Buckner, and I'm so excited to be here with you. This is a space for thoughtful conversations about being human where we can just talk about anything and everything. It's all submission based. So, my listeners are submitting questions and thoughts, and I take the time to sit down and answer them from like all things trauma to healing to faith deconstruction to the nervous system to Mormonism. I am a practicing therapist in Utah, and obviously, one of my specializations is how Mormonism impacts mental health. And so that is what has built this platform. So I am just so thankful for you all being here. And just my disclaimer, this podcast is for education and reflection, and it is not therapy. My hope is that these conversations do offer a bit of insight to who I am as a human, but also just kind of my clinical expertise and how I work as a professional. I just want to jump right into submissions, but before we get there, I wanted to give some life updates because I feel from my last episode to now, a whole bunch has happened. And I honestly didn't know if this episode was going to happen this month. And I made an intention this morning that I was going to sit down and record because it has been really important for me to show up for you all and to respond to your submissions because that is honestly my why. I want to have this ongoing dialogue, this conversation about what's coming up for you, what you're noticing, especially, as I continue to talk about things on social media. I announced last episode that I'm slowing down my work as a therapist and I'm only going to be working 1 day a week and just spending more time with my kids. And so again, it feels like this is a way to give back to everyone and to this community that I've built. So anyways, I want to make this happen, but I want to give you some life updates because they were some big things that have happened. So prior to me going out of town to Paris, my grandma passed away. And my grandma has been sick for a really long time. She had ovarian cancer, and most people who have ovarian cancer don't live very long, but she lived for 9 years. This woman is a fighter. I swear I have really, really good genes. And I said goodbye to her actually like last May and June because she had gotten really sick and they didn't think she would make it. And anyways, long story short, she ended up surviving for 9 more months. And my mom had called me and said, I think this is it. And so I was able to go down and be with her. And she woke up enough for me to see her. And I held her hand and I honestly just sat with her. It was clear she was suffering so much. And I just kept like silently kind of in my head thinking, like, it's okay to go, Graham. It's okay. I love you. And she passed a couple days later and we had her funeral, and I was really overwhelmed with what was going on with the loss of her, with getting ready to go out of town for 12 days. And then I'm also moving into a new house this weekend. So it's a mixture of really good things and hard things. And I just have really sat with that this is what life looks like. And this is when it can bring all of our stuff up and it can be hard and messy. And can we feel more regulated and how we navigate it, even though it is dysregulating? And I'm going to be honest, guys, there were times I had a couple times where I told my husband, I'm not okay. I'm having a little bit of a panic attack and I'm just going to go take space. I will say the difference in feeling this dysregulated, maybe over like the course of the last 5 years or so, is that I was able to give myself more grace because honestly, sometimes we are just struggling and we are suffering and things are hard and it's okay to not be okay. And we live in a world and I think even the standards I have for myself, it's like, oh no, I have to be okay. I have to be okay. But the reality is sometimes we're not okay and we just have to hold space for not being okay. My grandma and because of this passing of my grandma is my maternal lineage is my Mormon ancestry. So my grandma actually, her dad and grandfather homesteaded a lot of southern Utah. So I have really like strong Mormon pioneer heritage. And my grandma was not a practicing Mormon in the sense like she hadn't gone to church in years, but she was definitely still a believer. And I think towards the end of her life, she started to read her Book of Mormon and her scriptures, and she was buried in her Mormon temple outfit because that's how Mormons believe they need to be buried in order to get to the celestial kingdom when they go to heaven. And so it was really interesting because that's not how I remember my grandma. And she wasn't necessarily religious with me, but her funeral was very much a Mormon funeral. And it brought up a lot. I couldn't believe how much Jesus was talked about. And I just wanted them to talk about my grandma. But it was an interesting thing to sit in, especially in the space that I am in now, recognizing kind of the toll and impact Mormonism even had on my own grandmother and her like the way she saw herself and the way she existed. I don't feel like my grandma ever was able to fully be herself because there was still shame associated with it. So, for example, my grandma loved to drink and smoke and have fun with her friends and didn't follow all the rules of Mormonism. And I think, unfortunately, unconsciously, there is this lingering shame and judgment that you hold to yourself when you are still part of this system and this belief system, but not following any of the rules. So it was a fascinating funeral. And it's also, so many people talk about the afterlife and like you're gonna see her again. And here's the thing, guys, I don't know if I'm gonna see my grandma again. And how do I have peace around that? I believe in something bigger. I will say that my spirituality since leaving Mormonism has grown exponentially. I see it in the work that I do with clients and just knowing that there's something else out there, and maybe that something else is just that we're all connected in some way. But I think for me, the way I'm navigating the grief is just the love I have for my grandma, the memories I have with her, the way she showed up for me, the way she loved me, and honoring that gives me peace even amid the heartbreak that I feel. And my birthday is happening next week, and every year on my birthday, my grandma calls and sings me a song. I think it's like a Mormon primary song about birthdays, which is just really funny. But I have saved voicemails of her singing it, and this year she's not going to call me and sing me that song. And that's kind of hard to sit with. It's hard to realize the permanency of death and what that means. It's also given me more insight to the process of grief. I feel very capable of holding space. Prior to the loss of my grandma, I feel capable of holding space for clients who have lost loved ones, and this experience even makes that stronger. I understand more clearly the permanency of the loss, and also how it can be complicated if you've left religion and you're like, "Well, what happens next? How do I know I'm gonna see her?" And I think to me, one thing that stood out to me in the funeral is there's so much bypassing. It's like, "Well, it's okay that she died. She's in a better place. Jesus has her now," all that stuff. Well, we don't know any of that. And I think when you make that the focus instead of just the depth of the loss and like, it's so sad she's not here anymore and I'm not gonna ever talk to her again, like, that's allowed me to sit in my grief versus just, like, put it on a shelf that I'm gonna see her again because I don't know. And I have felt a lot of comfort. I actually had a dream like probably a week after she had passed, a week or so, and she was in my dream, and she was just how I remember how the last time I saw her, and she looked like how I would envision she would look, but she was like this being. She was like kind of glowing, and she was just at peace and happy and just like radiant, and that gave me peace. I knew my grandma was okay. And again, what maybe that's just a manifestation of my own nervous system and something I needed to feel, but I felt peace in that. I also have this tattoo on my wrist. It's a hummingbird, and I've always been like, "Oh, it's not my favorite tattoo. I wish I would have got it a little bigger." But I took a picture of myself holding my grandma's hand kind of the last day that I saw her, and it was with this wrist, and I could see the hummingbird. And hummingbirds remind me of my grandma. I used to always try to catch hummingbirds at her cabin. And now this tattoo just like has even more meaning because it represents my grandma. And I literally have a physical picture of me holding her hand with the tattoo. So I think for me, that's how I've learned to navigate grief from people in my life. One of my very best friends, I mean, she's my college roommate. She knows death so intimately. She lost her mom when she was 15. And obviously, I never met her mom, but her mom was very much present my entire college experience. We call her mom Jillbug, and every time we saw a ladybug, it would be like Jill was here with us. Jillbug was here. And the way my best friend talked about her mom and like kind of named the grief and the hard part of it showed me that that's how we start to navigate it. That's how we hold space for it. That's how we move through it. Yes, maybe we will see our loved ones again, and I think that's a wonderful thought, but I don't know that, and I don't wanna fixate on that. I wanna fixate on what I do know, and it is that I love my grandma, and I can remember her, and every time I look at my tattoo on my wrist or I see a hummingbird in real life, I can honor her and feel her. I just wanted to share that because I know that a lot of my listeners have left Mormonism, and grief and loss and death can be really hard when you have lost that framework. And so I work with clients a lot on grief and loss and just how do we find meaning? how do we feel the presence of our loved ones? How do we notice them in our daily life? And I have found that now going through this experience just to attune to it as it happens, as I have a dream of my grandma, as I see a hummingbird, just okay, she's here. She's just saying hi, and that feels really comforting. I'm also, like I said, moving into a new house, and I haven't publicly shared this. I tend to keep certain things private just because the internet is a rough space. I feel that people listening to my podcast obviously are here for the right reasons. They want to get to know me as a human. So I wanted to share that with you. I have really struggled since I moved back to Utah. I've had a hard time feeling grounded in this space. And interestingly enough, my husband's not from here, but when we moved here and in that first year of moving here, he ended up buying a business and putting down honestly more roots than I have. And we are not leaving because his business is doing well, and we should stay for that reason, right? And it's been really great for him, and I'm so proud of him, and I'm proud of what he's built. And although, like, there's a part of me that's like, "Come home and tell me you wanna move out of Utah. I'll go in a second." That's also not a reality, and I don't know if that would be the best for our family and what we've built. So, anyways, long story short, we decided to build a home, and I in the past have not made an effort to get to know my neighbors, haven't made an effort to build, like, community, like, with where I'm at, and I don't know exactly what that resistance was. I think part of it is not feeling fully like I want to be in the community in Utah, but this feels different. We move into the house tomorrow. We already know a bunch of people in the neighborhood, and I'm already thinking about I was telling my kids last night, "Oh, what's something we could do for our neighbors to take around and introduce ourselves?" And it just feels more like this is where I'm going to be. I am clearly meant to be here in some capacity. I if you would have asked me, I would have never thought that my career would end up here and I would be helping people who have left Mormonism. And also it makes a lot of sense. I left Mormonism. I have a very, like, distant relationship with Mormonism. I have a lot of perspective in what helped me leave, and I'm a safe space to hold for clients who are even just questioning, not even that they wanna leave, but they just wanna come talk and talk about the impact that it's having on their lives, and that's not easy to do with someone who is an active LDS member. It just isn't. That's the reality of the situation, and so I think, 8 years later, I've lived in Utah for 8 years, I'm finally like, "Okay, I can put my roots down. I can be grounded here. I can lean into where I'm at right now and let it grow." So, I will keep you posted on that, and I will say that moving is a very dysregulating thing when you're in transition and change. There's lots of moving parts, there's lots of stress, and it's life and how life works. So I'm excited, and I'm glad I made this episode happen with you all today. So those are my life updates. Thank you for listening. Now let's jump into some submissions. I have some themes that are showing up in the submissions, and I have been thinking, I talk about this a lot just in general, but I have some submissions about baptism and kids and how do we navigate that. And so I thought that would be a really helpful thing to dive into today. First submission. Here's two things on my mind. First, how do I still teach my kids about Jesus without it being so Mormon? I want to teach them about God in all the good ways, but I don't even know where to start. Should I go to another or multiple churches to teach my kids a variety of ways? Read the Bible? I don't know. I'm going to start with that before I jump into the next part of the submission. What's coming up for me is I want you to just be really curious as to why you feel the need to teach your child about Jesus. Maybe it's because you believe in Jesus, which is if you believe in Jesus, I think that's great. I'm going to offer just some caution here in terms of teaching our children about Jesus. When you teach about Jesus, you're essentially teaching them about a man who was killed for the sins of other people, and we're talking about a pretty severe, like, death and loss, and I have a hard time with that because I don't think it's actually developmentally appropriate for children. I don't think kids really know how to work through or reconcile what we're teaching them in terms of, like, this guy died and he was put up on a cross, and now if we believe in him and we follow him, we are going to be better humans because of that. And we will be in heaven or, whatever it is that you're teaching. For me, I think the doctrine of Jesus is actually very scary for children because like it puts so much pressure on their shoulders. And why did God kill his only son? I mean, why couldn't he just forgive people? I think that's what I've been thinking about a lot. So those are just my thoughts about Jesus in general. Do I think you can't teach your kid about Jesus? No, not at all. If that's something you want to do, I think it needs to be in a developmentally appropriate way. And maybe you want to just teach about who Jesus was as a person versus the whole resurrection piece. That's maybe more the avenue I would go. I would teach about him in a way like, what are the things he did that you liked and you were supportive of and you agreed with, right? I also have had this experience. I have a lot of people that I know that are Jewish, and I actually went to a Jewish funeral several months ago, and it really got me thinking about who Jesus was as a person and why Jewish people don't believe in him. And my best friend, who I actually talked about earlier, converted to Judaism later in life, but we were talking after the funeral, and she was saying, what I really like about Judaism is that there isn't one right way to live. There's like this conversation, this discussion. And I think the Jesus doctrine is like, follow Jesus. These are the things you need to be doing to be a good person. And it just made me think about why Jesus was persecuted, because in a lot of ways, I think that also reminds me of Mormonism. It reminds me of Joseph Smith. It reminds me of these are the things you have to do to be worthy. And not saying that it's okay that Jesus was persecuted, but I could see if you have a group of people who are like more open and curious and wanting to be open to multiple different ways of life, and then you have this person that's coming in saying like, follow me, these are the things you need to be doing. I don't know. I like it's just sparked a lot of conversation and dialogue and more openness on my end. So I think it could be really beneficial to learn about all different faiths. I would invite you to learn about faiths that don't believe in Jesus and explore those type of dynamics as well to give your children like a really well-rounded understanding of religion. What also comes up for me just curiously is, do you feel like you need to teach your children about Jesus because that's how they have good values and morals? Or can you just teach them how to have good values and morals without believing in Jesus? As someone who doesn't believe in Jesus, in the sense that I mean, I believe Jesus was a real person, but I don't necessarily need my children to understand who he was in order to teach them how to be a good person. I have found that parenting without religion has been such a gift. I've enjoyed teaching my kids about all different things and asking them what they think about something they learn, or when there's a situation that's uncertain, like, yeah, there are some things we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. And in particular with death and dying, we've had lots of conversations, obviously with my grandma passing, but we've had various people we know pass and animals pass, and talking about how we don't know what happens when we die. And this is the one life we get to live. And that's why it's really important that we live it intentionally and with integrity and with love and care and respect for other people. And I have found that my kids are very grounded. I would say they aren't scared of death or dying because we talk about it in a very honest, clear way. And we don't necessarily need a certain model for how to be a good person. And I find a lot of comfort in that in raising my children. And also too, I think in the same breath, like if Jesus is someone that you respect and you think is a good person, teach them about it from that lens. I think there's lots of good examples of wonderful people in the world and qualities we want our children to have. So those are just my thoughts. I hope that's helpful. And again, I don't want to come across as a place of judgment. If you do believe in Jesus, I think part of my hope in having these open conversations is offering other sides to the story or curious reflection. And as always, I am not perfect. I don't have all the answers. These are just like my thoughts that come up as I'm reading these submissions and as we're talking and having these conversations. I want to get to the next part of the submission. It says, my child turns 8 this summer. It'll be the first sure sign to our family, both sides, that we don't go to church. We haven't told any family members on my husband's side and haven't told my parents. I feel sick when I think about telling my in-laws there won't be a baptism. And it doesn't help that I have a niece who just turned 8 a couple weeks ago and who will be baptized. And all the school friends turning 8 are getting baptized. I know my kids hear about it and questions if they should be doing it too. It's just a lot of pressure and I feel sad and stressed about it. First of all, I just wanna say that's incredibly valid and real. I think there is so much pressure in this culture and in this community about, especially if you have grown up Mormon and you have since left the church, and now you're gonna have to have these conversations with family members and you have other family members getting baptized. I think part of what I'm hearing here too is some of your own activation coming up, which is valid, and some of that is your own stuff, and I would really invite you to be cognizant of not putting that on your child. So yes, like, they're having some questions and they're wondering if they should be baptized. And I think that's a great conversation to have. And I would ask them to say, oh, like, yeah, tell me more about that. Do you feel like you should get baptized because everyone's getting baptized? And I think that's a great time to have a conversation as to why we're choosing not to get baptized, because that actually shouldn't be a reason to make a choice to commit to something. You should make a choice to commit to something because it's what you want and you're ready and willing to do that. And I think it's also okay to talk with your 8-year-old and say, as your parent at 8 years old, I don't think you have the ability to make such a big decision, and I wouldn't want you to make a decision that you're not ready for. And part of my job, I mean, I say this all the time to my kids, but part of my job as a parent is to keep you safe. And I don't necessarily think that making a choice to commit to a religion you don't fully understand, you can't fully consent to, is a safe choice. And that can be your boundary with your kids. And you can be really sturdy in that. And you can be really honest. I also think you can have that same boundary with your parents. They're not going to like it, they are going to push back. And you also don't have to have a conversation. You don't have to explain it. You can just be really like, I would take your emotions out of it. I would say, these are our reasons for not baptizing. This is what we're choosing. I understand you don't agree. I'm also not having a further conversation about it. And take care of yourself. Take care of your own stress. Be curious about your own activation and work with that, and try to, ground and regulate yourself maybe before having those conversations, but recognize that what you feel is your responsibility. And then that extends to your parents too, what they feel is their responsibility. If they don't like what you're doing, that's not your problem. That's theirs. That's theirs to sit with and work through. And you are allowed to make a choice that you feel is in the best interest for your family, even if other people don't agree with it. And I know that's really going to go against what you have been conditioned within Mormonism. And yes, you have left and maybe you have deconstructed, but some of that still comes with you. You still feel that pressure to not disappoint your parents. And unfortunately, living a life to not disappoint our parents means we are going to disappoint ourselves and we are going to disappoint the family that we are raising. So, hopefully that maybe gives you a little bit of encouragement to stay firm with your boundaries. All right, next submission. Again, another kind of question about baptism. Husband wants our 7-year-old to be baptized this year when she turns 8. I'm fully out of the church, but he's fully in it. But we have a good dynamic and respect others' journey for the most part. We cannot agree on a solution where we both feel comfortable. I feel sick about the idea and have recommended having our child wait until she's older to make the decision to be baptized. He feels strongly that this is what is best for her now, and that it's important that she trusts the Lord with this step in her salvation. When we ask our child her desire, she says she wants to be baptized as long as she can wear goggles and have refreshments. She doesn't understand what she would be committing to at all. No 8-year-old does. Help. This is such a hard situation, especially in a mixed faith dynamic. And I also think it's really important that your voice is heard just as much as your husband's. I think that it's really important to explore a solution where you compromise. I also think as a parent, you have every right to not consent to baptism. And I don't know the answer to this. I haven't necessarily looked it up, but I don't think the church can move forward with baptizing your child without the consent of both parents. I don't think that that would be ethical for them to do. So I think you are allowed to say no to that. And obviously, that's going to create difficulties in your relationship with your husband. So that might be worth looking into maybe someone who specializes in mixed faith dynamics. That's not my specialty, but finding someone who does and working through it with them. I think there is definitely an age that you can compromise on, an age that's older. I think it's also appropriate to share your concerns with your 8-year-old and their decision making, kind of even what I said earlier, how I was kind of talking about it with that other parent in terms of why you don't think that getting baptized at 8 is a choice that an 8-year-old is able to make, and having refreshments and wearing goggles is not a reason to be getting baptized, that it is a much bigger commitment. I think there's also a conversation to have with your husband too about if this is developmentally appropriate. I have worked with a lot of people. I have read a lot of stories about baptism, and I would say that not everyone is impacted negatively. Like some kids just get baptized and they're good and they move on. But there are a lot of kids who internalize the doctrine. Kids are very literal. They do not necessarily have the ability to understand, that a lot of the doctrine is metaphorical, and they don't understand, like they literally can think that they're a bad person if they sin after they're 8. They can internalize it and create a lot of shame, a lot of distress. I know for a lot of kids, 7 is when they started, like 7, 8 years old is when they started having suicidal ideation. And they wouldn't necessarily name it that, but they thought about death and dying because if they die, that means they're clean. It also is a time where they become very fearful too about death and dying and not being able to be with their family forever. So I think there's a lot of doctrine that's developmentally inappropriate and can really impact children's brains. And that should be a part of the conversation with your husband as well. And again, you are allowed to have a voice. I think that it's really difficult in mixed faith dynamics. And this might be a place where you need additional support, but I would encourage you to stay firm with your boundaries, and you guys are parenting together. There might be things in the future that you want that your husband doesn't want, and you're going to have a conversation about it. But to me, there's a lot of layers to this. There's a lot like a lot of mental health implications, and a 16-year-old choosing to get baptized is much different than an 8-year-old. And I would really invite your husband to sit with that as well, and to be curious about why there are so many decisions made within Mormonism before the brain is fully developed. And part of that is then you don't have to formulate your own identity. If they can get you at this very young developmental age, when we're the most vulnerable to trauma, quite frankly, our brains can then become wired to believe in this belief system. And that's why you have so many lifelong members. That's why you have very educated people who do not question the church, because they have this early trauma, this early developmental period in their life where they were conditioned to believe in this religion. Next submission. Not sure if this is the right platform for this, but how to overcome the fear of messing up my kids because of the church. I don't believe in the church anymore, but my husband still does. So now we are in a mixed faith marriage. I have so much fear of messing up my kids. I'm scared church will hurt them, or that it will make them see me as a mom who went the wrong path. I don't want them to be brainwashed. I'm scared. And I also don't want this to affect my marriage. This is hard. So obviously another mixed faith marriage submission, and it is hard. I also want to say again, my specialty is not mixed faith marriages. I am not a couples therapist. So take all of what I say with a grain of salt. I think I'm going to focus more here on just raising kids and having conversations with kids. I think it's really important to be honest about your concerns, and be honest about things that they're hearing at church and they're learning at church, and offering almost the other side of the coin, like other thoughts, other perspectives, because that's just as valid and important as what your husband thinks is important for them to learn at church. I think it's also a conversation to have with him too. Like, hey, kids are going to church and they're learning about things that essentially teach them that I am not a good person. Because really, from within Families Forever doctrine, the belief is in order to be with your family forever, everyone has to be baptized, everyone has to be a worthy temple recommend holder, right? You have to kind of check all the boxes. And so your kids do learn, well, mommy's not doing that. Mom's not part of that. So does that mean I'm not going to be with her? And you can absolutely have those conversations with them and say like that you don't believe that. And they're also participating in a culture that is teaching them that. And I think with your husband, like kind of having an open dialogue about how do we reconcile that? That's really difficult for me. I'm not taking the kids to a church that are essentially saying, you're a bad person, and just creating a lot of openness and curiosity. It's less about judgment. It's less about convincing him to be different or convincing your kids to be different, but just being honest and clear and direct about what's coming up for you. I think too often we tiptoe around things and we don't necessarily say what we're thinking or what we're feeling because we don't want to upset someone. But to me, naming that, saying that out loud, letting it be messy and imperfect. I think sometimes just starting the conversation with, "Hey, I don't know how to say what I wanna say, but I really wanna have this conversation with you because I'm concerned, and I'm gonna try and get it out. Like, are you open to going there with me?" Can go a long way. I also don't think you will mess your kids up. I mean, look at all of us that have come out of Mormonism that have figured things out. I think having a grounded parent, a parent who knows who they are, knows what they've worked through, is able to have these honest, real conversations about life is so beneficial and so important for our children. They need a safe adult, and you always get to be that because you are a place where they can come talk about their honest feelings with the church. And I think if you're always clearly communicating that with them, there's so much hope and support. I also think one of the best things we get as a parent is the opportunity to repair. So let's just like play the tape that down the road your kids are like, "I can't believe you made me go, like I went to church and you let me go to church and you supported dad taking me to church," or whatever. Let's just say they say that as adults. And I think as a parent, you can say, "You're right. Like I'm so sorry I didn't do it differently. I was worried about you and I'm so sorry. Thank you for telling me." That right there creates instant connection. Like, we only get to repair with our kids if we mess up, and I'm not even saying you're messing up. I learned this once from one of my very favorite, like, parent psychologists, Dr. Becky, about how when we mess up, we get the opportunity to repair and how that builds connection with our kids, and that's been such a gift for me as a parent because we are so worried, right? We're so worried of messing up and misstepping and doing things wrong, and a lot of times this is more like in the moment, like as a mom, I yell or something and my kids are upset and then I have to go apologize. Like, "I'm so sorry for yelling. That's not your fault. That's on mommy. Mommy shouldn't be yelling." But I think this translates across the lifespan. I mean, think about it. As a kid, if you went to your parents and you're like, "Mom, I am so mad you raised me Mormon. Like, I wish you would have raised me differently." And your mom said, "Thank you for telling me. You're right. I wish I would have allowed you to consent to it more." You can't tell me that wouldn't feel good. It would feel good. It would build an instant connection with your parents. So I think just kind of trusting that you are doing the best that you can. And then if they come to you later in life and say, "This part really messed me up," can you show up for them? Can you take ownership and accountability and hold space for them? I don't think you'll mess your kids up. I think what you're doing right now is what you can be doing, and you are in a mixed faith marriage, and it's really hard, and there are so many different dynamics at play, but can you stay grounded and aligned with who you are and honest and allow yourself to mess up? That's gonna offer so much for your kids. And again, like I said to the other person, I think sometimes we need a third party. It might be worth finding a mixed faith couples therapist who really understands how to help you and your husband navigate this in a way that feels aligned to both of you. But like I said to the other person, your concerns are real and valid and they deserve a place to talk about them. And if I guess for either of these submissions, if you feel like you can't have these conversations with your partner, to me that's a bigger conversation and something to be really curious about. Like, why am I so scared to talk to my partner about this? And is that a healthy partner relationship if I can't say how I feel? And I recognize that the church plays a role in that. I recognize Mormonism plays a role in that, and that's impacting part of how you're functioning in that relationship. And it's also still a reality that needs to be named and it needs to be addressed and it needs to be explored. Because if we don't feel safe to have these conversations with our partner, there are some deeper things that are already going on. I think that really covers like some of the baptism stuff. Those are three submissions that I got on baptism. Let me know if there's further conversations you guys want to have on that. If you have a follow-up question, please submit it. The link to the submissions are always in the show notes of every episode. I have a couple other submissions that I want to get to that are not necessarily aligned with baptism, but they are about the LDS Church. So I really liked this question because, oh man, I think it's a complicated one. How to navigate discussing departure from the LDS Church with believing parents who genuinely want to know, but I also don't want to fact bomb them. I love that they genuinely want to know. So I just want to say that I think that to me is like they're curious. They want to understand you. And I think I would make it less about fact bombing them and more just about your personal decision and how you came to that decision. And you could even start the conversation with, hey, I do have some things that I want to share with you. I want to talk about this openly with you. But I also want you to recognize that there are going to be some things that maybe are very uncomfortable for you to hear and sit with. Do you want me to proceed? So you kind of get their consent before maybe you do drop some of the truth bombs. Because I think, right, maybe some of the truth bombs were your reasons for leaving. And that's what led you to that decision. And so you can't necessarily have that conversation with your parents without disclosing them. And so I think a softer way to approach that is to share that with them prior before you actually drop the truth bomb. That's what came up for me when I read that. I think, there's a lot of care going into this conversation and mutual respect on both sides. And so they genuinely want to know and you genuinely want to show up with care. And I would even name that before you dive into the content of the conversation is I love you guys. I respect you guys. I know that some of my reasons for leaving are I'm going to share things that maybe you're not ready to hear. Do you want to proceed? I'm okay if we don't proceed. Like I can have respect if you're not ready for that conversation and you can let me know when you're ready in the future. Yeah. Let me know what comes up for you around that and how you feel about having that type of open conversation with your parents. I think again, to me, there's a lot of strengths here, just in the sense that they genuinely want to know, and maybe unconsciously they genuinely want to know because they have some of the same questions, but they were never brave enough to ask them or explore them, and now they have a child that has made such a significant life decision. I think obviously being cognizant of what your boundaries are going into it. Are there certain things that they might say to convince you to bring you back or to dismiss your experience? And how do you want to exit that conversation? And just, feeling confident if those things do come up that you can say, I don't think we're on the same page yet. That's okay. I'm no longer comfortable having this conversation. Maybe we can revisit at another date. I think you get to kind of determine your interaction here and how you set that boundary. So just, going into the conversation with some already maybe pre-designed boundaries for yourself can be really helpful as well. One more submission that I want to jump in today. What are some of the effects of marrying young in the LDS culture or post LDS? I got married when I was fairly young and it feels like it wasn't the right person. Are there others with the same experience? Yes, there are many, many people with the same experience. I will say so many clients I work with, I'm navigating this with them. And I know so many friends. I have read so many stories. I have talked to many different people within LDS culture who felt that they jumped into marriage and they didn't actually make the decision. And it's really, really hard because you're part of an environment, whether you're Mormon or not, when you grow up in Mormon culture, everyone's getting married young and you feel this pressure. It's similar to baptism, right? Everyone's doing it. It feels like the next step in life. And I think sometimes we can slide into a decision versus actually making the decision and choosing the person we want to be with. And that doesn't mean that the person you're with, you need to end the relationship. I know a lot of people who got married young and have had to renegotiate this in their relationship and have honest conversations about where they're at. So I want to preface it with that, but I do think some of the effects are, and not to talk about Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, but that show to me really represents the effects of what happens when you get married really young and you have children really young before actually knowing your own identity. And I'm actually someone who values marriage very much. Getting married to my husband was one of the best decisions of my life. And I will also say in the same breath, I'm very thankful that I did not marry my Mormon boyfriend when I was 18, 19, 20 years old, because there was a part of me that wanted to come home and get married for this exact reason that we're talking about, right? Where it was what I was supposed to be doing. And I say that because I was nowhere ready to get married and I was not ready to have kids. I needed to have this really messy young adult experience. And what we're seeing on the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives is they're having that messy young adult experience, but like 10 years later, it's like this delayed developmental experience, right? Where they're exploring their sexuality, they're they're in these like very interesting relationships with their partners. They're kissing other people's friends. Like it's so complex. And I think a lot of it's developmentally appropriate in the sense that they never got that development at a young age. This is what happens when repression happens. So I think those effects are real. I think that when you kind of jump into a marriage before you know who you are, you part of your identity is in that relationship versus with yourself. So I think my first recommendation would be to build a relationship with yourself and get to know yourself, your likes, your dislikes, your sexuality, what your goals are. And as you come to that foundation, how does that like intertwine in your relationship with your partner? And are they open and curious to exploring that piece with you and maybe having dialogue about your guys' choice to get married young before you fully knew each other? And how is that showing up for them? And again, this does not mean that your relationship needs to be over. I think it's okay to feel this way. I think there's another element of this too is there's a lot of grief that can come. And that's a little bit what I'm hearing is like, is this the right person? Are you grieving the loss of not having that developmental period where you get to go be a stupid 18 to 23, 24, 25-year old, right? Where you date the wrong people and you just make mistakes and figure out all those things I'm talking about. And I think naming the grief of not having that sometimes can alleviate the distress that maybe you feel in the here and now related to that you married the wrong person. So much of the work I do with clients is really normalizing that grief and validating that grief and recognizing that we can hold space for it without necessarily having to go back to relive that developmental period. And I think it's building awareness around what's going on. So those are some of my thoughts. I think that there's absolutely a way to do this with the partner you're with if you both can be open and curious and vulnerable and you're doing your own inner work, then you get to grow together. And sometimes that means you grow apart. I oftentimes invite people to put everything on the table. There doesn't have to be rules and just let everything be an option to kind of take the pressure off. Maybe you guys are going to work out and maybe you're not, but maybe this whole process of figuring it out together allows you to grow closer. I hope that was helpful. I think more than anything, I just really want you to know that you are not alone. Like, I cannot tell you how many times I have a conversation like this. It's like every week I'm having some degree of a conversation like this, whether it's again with a client or a friend. I had a phone call with a friend who's exited Mormon culture and is in this situation right now. And we literally spent an hour talking about it. And I just had to say, like, I wish there was a right answer. I wish that it was easy and it wasn't complex and it didn't have so many layers, but there's often not. Like, so much of this is like kind of really about connecting with yourself and being really honest with what you need and what you want and what you hope for, and those things can be very uncomfortable to sit with. So you are not alone at all, and I am sending you love. I also like I'm not trying to recommend therapy for everyone, but just know like there are places where you can go and have these conversations, whether that's with a couples therapist or with your own therapist. I'm not currently taking on new clients, but I do have a list of really incredible resources. So if you actually send me an email, ashleybuckner@lmft@gmail.com, I can send you that list. You can find a provider that aligns with you and kind of even dive into some of this on a deeper level, because I think it can be supportive to have a safe space to go talk about it. I know for my clients that were navigating this, just having a place to go talk about it where I'm not judging them. I'm not telling them to leave their marriage. I'm not telling them to stay. I'm validating their experiences and the loss associated with making such a quick decision to get married and letting them process in a way that they need to process. There's such a gift in that and having a safe space to explore. So thank you so much for writing in. Please like follow up with any other questions you have. I again, I want to say I'm just kind of going off the cuff here. I'm sharing the things that come like up for me as I'm reading through your submissions. I don't have all of the answers. This is not like a definitive, this is what you should do. It's more so just hoping to add some perspective and thought and also validation and normalization of what people are going through. And I say this for this last submission, but to everything I talked about today. This is hard stuff. And this is everyone's first time being alive. This is everyone's first time having to navigate it, and that's what makes life hard because there were a lot of things that you didn't choose, and maybe you wouldn't choose if life was different. And I recognize that and I honor that. And something that's been really helpful for me has been thinking about, okay, I can't change my past. I can't change like the way it influenced me, and I can still take ownership for the here and now, but I don't have to hate my past either. I'm gonna go back to what I said. I really value marriage, and I'm gonna tell you right now, part of that value comes from being raised Mormon. Like, obviously, I was conditioned to get married, and that was a very important thing in my life. And I am married to an incredible man who I chose, but part of my reason for valuing marriage was because of my upbringing, and I can't hate that because I have this incredible relationship from it. So, it's about acknowledging what happened, taking stock of the trauma and the distress, but also taking ownership for our choices and our decisions moving forward. And can we maybe look back and be able to honor some of those parts that shaped us for who we are because we can't change them and they're a part of us always. And that has been really helpful for me just in terms of Mormonism. And I would say that even like my ability to have these conversations with you all to talk about Mormon culture comes from being raised Mormon and growing up in this culture. And there was a time in my life when I hated it and I wanted nothing to do with it and I never wanted to talk about it, but I can't hate it. My ancestors are Mormon. And if I hate it, I hate a part of myself and I don't want to hate a part of myself, but I want to do it differently. I want to take ownership and responsibility for my trauma and my distress and show up differently in the world. And sometimes that means I'm going to have really hard conversations, or we're going to have really hard conversations, right? With the people in our lives. And that's essentially like, if I could say the theme of, this episode is that sometimes we have to have the hard, uncomfortable conversations with those that we love in order to find movement, in order to become a better version of ourselves and our relationships as parents. And it is not easy. And it's not easy when you grow up with a belief system that has influenced you to the degree that it has. It's not easy to untangle all of that. And it's also the reality of the situation. And so taking ownership and realizing that you get to choose what it happens next. There's so much power in that. Just really sit with that. Really sit with like, this is your life. You get to decide and you are going to mess up. But messing up gives us the opportunity to repair, and repair makes our relationships deeper and more connected. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Please continue to submit your questions, your thoughts, your shares. I mean, like genuinely anything. Like you guys can confess something to me. I am so here for all of it. I love reading your submissions. I love reading your stories. And I will be back next month. Until then, take care of yourselves and we'll talk soon.